I am tonight going to present a minority viewpoint, yet I am distilling the essence of my 30 years as a campaigner locally and globally, giving a flavour of my insight and the wisdom I've acquired over the years, what I've intuited and witnessed and believed to be true. And I wonder if the public and some governments might be mistaken in their convictions. I can certainly understand government policies on carbon around the world, and perhaps at the end of this evening you might have a different perspective on things. My life's purpose has for 30 years been, and I quote, to inspire people around the world to live in sustainable partnership with nature. Currently in the world we have, simply speaking, three systems, if you like, three capitalisms. The first one is the capitalism we know, the alliance of fossil fuel companies with their debt-based banking, motor vehicles, chemicals, tobacco companies, alcohol and big pharma. There is a second one which we don't know much of, which is the military-industrial complex. And there is the third one we'll come on to shortly, but I want to show you a clip.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
We now stand 10 years past the midpoint of a century that has witnessed 4 major wars among great nations. 3 of these involved our own country. Despite these holocausts, America is today the strongest, the most influential, and most productive nation in the world. Understandably proud of this preeminence, we yet realize that America's leadership and prestige depend not merely upon our unmatched material progress, riches, and military strength, but on how we use our power in the interest of world peace and human betterment. Throughout America's adventure in free government, our basic purposes have been to keep the peace, to foster progress in human achievement, and to enhance liberty, dignity, and integrity among peoples and among nations. To strive for less would be unworthy of a free and religious people. Any failure traceable to arrogance or our lack of comprehension or readiness to sacrifice would inflict upon us grievous hurt, both at home and abroad. Progress toward these noble goals is persistently threatened by the conflict now engulfing the world. It commands our whole attention, absorbs our very beings. We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method. Unhappily, the danger it poses promises to be of indefinite duration. To meet it successfully, there is call for not so much the emotional and transitory sacrifices of crisis, but rather those which enable us to carry forward steadily, surely, and without complaint, the burdens of a prolonged and complex struggle with liberty the stake. Only thus shall we remain, despite every provocation, on our charted course toward permanent peace and human betterment. Crises there will continue to be. In meeting them, whether foreign or domestic, great or small, there is a recurring temptation to feel that some spectacular and costly action could become the miraculous solution to all current difficulties. A huge increase in newer elements of our defenses, development of unrealistic programs to cure every ill in agriculture, a dramatic expansion in basic and applied research. These and many other possibilities, each possibly promising in itself, may be suggested as the only way to the road we wish to travel. But each proposal must be weighed in the light of a broader consideration, the need to maintain balance in and among national programs. Balance between the private and the public economy. Balance between the cost and hoped-for advantages. Balance between the clearly necessary and the comfortably desirable. Balance between our essential requirements as a nation and the duties imposed by the nation upon the individual. Balance between actions of the moment and the national welfare of the future. Good judgment seeks balance and progress. Lack of it eventually finds imbalance and frustration. The record of many decades stands as proof that our people and their government have, in the main, understood these truths and have responded to them well in the face of threat and stress. But threats, new in kind or degree, constantly arise. Of these I mention two only. A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. Akin to and largely responsible for the sweeping changes in our industrial military posture has been the technological revolution during recent decades. In this revolution, research has become central. It also becomes more formalized, complex, and costly. A steadily increasing share is conducted for, by, or at the direction of the federal government. Today, the solitary inventor, tinkering in his shop, has been overshadowed by task forces of scientists in laboratories and testing fields. In the same fashion, the free university, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge costs involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific technological elite. It is the task of statesmanship to mold, to balance, and to integrate these and other forces, new and old, within the principles of our democratic system, ever aiming toward the supreme goals of our free society. Another factor in maintaining balance involves the element of time. As we peer into society's future, we, you and I, and our government, must avoid the impulse to live only for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience the precious resources of tomorrow. We cannot mortgage the material assets of our grandchildren without risking the loss also of their political and spiritual heritage. We want democracy to survive for all generations to come, not to become the insolvent phantom of tomorrow. During the long lane of the history yet to be written, America knows that this world of ours, ever growing smaller, must avoid becoming a community of dreadful fear and hate, and be instead a proud confederation of mutual trust and respect. Such a confederation must be one of equals. The weakest must come to the conference table with the same confidence as do we, protected as we are by our moral, economic, and military strength. That table, though scarred by many past frustrations, cannot be abandoned for the certainty agony of disarmament of the battlefield. Disarmament with mutual honor and confidence is a continuing imperative. Together we must learn how to compose differences, not with arms, but with intellect and decent purpose. Because this need is so sharp and apparent, I confess that I lay down my official responsibilities in this field with a definite sense of disappointment. As one who has witnessed the horror and the lingering sadness of war, as one who knows that another war could utterly destroy this civilization which has been so slowly and painfully built over thousands of years, I wish I could say tonight that a lasting peace is in sight. Happily, I can say that war has been avoided. Steady progress toward our ultimate goal has been made, but so much remains to be done. As a private citizen, I shall never cease to do what little I can to help the world advance along that road. So in this, my last good night to you as your president, I thank you for the many opportunities you have given me for public service in war and in peace. I trust in that service, you find some things worthy. As for the rest of it, I know you will find ways to improve performance in the future. You and I, my fellow citizens, need to be strong in our faith that all nations under God will reach the goal of peace with justice. May we be ever unswerving in devotion to principle, confident but humble with power, diligent in pursuit of the nation's great goals. To all the peoples of the world, I once more give expression to America's prayerful and continuing aspiration. We pray that peoples of all faiths, all races, all nations may have their great human needs satisfied, that those now denied opportunity shall come to enjoy it to the full, that all who yearn for freedom may experience its spiritual blessings. Those who have freedom will understand also its heavy responsibility, that all who are insensitive to the needs of others will learn charity, and that the sources, scourges of poverty, disease, and ignorance will be made disappear from the earth, and that in the goodness of time all peoples will come to live together in a peace guaranteed by the binding force of mutual respect and love. Now, on Friday noon, I am to become a private citizen. I am proud to do so. I look forward to it. Thank you, and good night.
So we are looking at 60 years later, a massive hemorrhaging of the public and a massive expansion of the private sector in the US and around the world, such that many governments no longer have the authority to find out what is happening. Many prime ministers and presidents do not have the clearance to find out what is happening at the top, and this is something which we'll come back later to. And then the third kind of capitalism is a green technology capitalism of smart meters, solar panels, lithium batteries, EVs and EVs, and everything green and carbon. However, when you look at in depth at some of the technology in this new kind of green capitalism, you find it isn't quite so green after all. For instance, the EVs are sold as zero emission, and they're zero emission where they are right now, but it costs, there are huge emissions to build them, usually with fossil fuel, and to generate them using fossil fuel generation, or in New Zealand perhaps 80% renewable power. But they are not in themselves clean, fossil fuel free. And then there's the end of the life cycle in terms of the recycling of the battery and the recycling of the car. So there's a mass kind of a new fashionable industry now growing around this green capitalism to inspire people that it's the best thing since sliced bread. So who am I and what are my credentials? In 1990, I did a master's in environmental economics, but there was no environmental economics in the UK, so I did it through agricultural economics. But that was my thesis, which I found the other day. I did a thesis on adjustment and ecological sustainability. And I was saying that it is only through an ecologized transformation of societies that sustainable development can be achieved. And it's only through such an achievement that the continued existence of the species can be assured. Growing up in East Africa, I realized in 1979, at the age of 14 and a half, that my life would be about defending indigenous people's rights to live on their ancestral lands around the world. This took me into studying geography, economics, and getting involved in development and environment. And I believed everything I read and heard in the media about climate change. The UK Prime Minister, Mrs. Thatcher, a biochemist, we were told she understood the science. And she was the first Prime Minister to champion climate change globally. So in the early 1990s, I spent the first 3 years as a civil servant in the European Commission, managing the environment portfolio for 15 countries of the former Soviet Union, including getting the Russians and the Iranians together around the Caspian Sea for the first ever international program of action. And next, as the executive director of Global Legislators Organization for a Balanced Environment, set up by former President Al Gore and Gorbachev, I attended the 1997 United Nations Climate Change Conferences in Kyoto and Buenos Aires. And I was actively involved in bringing more parliaments into the international environmental process. At the talks in Kyoto in 1997, I had huge concern that climate was not being helped by the arrival of the finance and economics troupe, people who believed in using market forces to manage climate rather than any political process of allocating per capita greenhouse gas emissions equitably between nations. So my organization was arguing for allocating per capita greenhouse gas emissions equitably between nations so that poor countries could increase their emissions and the rich countries could reduce theirs, so we get to global parity. However, inside Kyoto, I observed one government slagging off the independent scientist who became the first head of the IPCC. And a year later, that incumbent had been pushed out and a very competent, brilliant energy expert had been brought in. But that person was always, if you like, owned by somebody. He hadn't come in through a sense of he hadn't been the best. He'd been brought in, and I began to question his integrity and whether he was always operating for this government. He himself left under a cloud of his own a decade later and has been replaced by an economist. So we have the IPCC, which is the International Climate Change body, which reviews peer-reviewed documents, run by an economist and not a climate change advisor. Since 2007, I've been involved in the Pachamama Alliance, helping to inspire people around the world to be the change. And in 2009, having not been elected to the European Parliament, I decided to cycle around the world on this idea of Topo Tokyo Totnes. It's a kind of climate change model of the Earth on the left-hand side. And two of us set off from the bottom of Australia. There were problems with starting in New Zealand, so we started off at the bottom of Australia to cycle up through Australia into Indonesia. The idea was to get to the United Nations Earth Summit in December 2012. And as my colleague and I set off on a cold, wet winter's day in southern Australia, we realized we would have to slow down in order to provide value to communities along the way. And at the same time, the UN changed the date of the Earth Summit from December to June. That was our cycling on the first day. On the left, Melbourne with horizontal rain and snow. On the right, obviously, Sydney. Left is Brisbane. And we were leading workshops along the way. And so the top right is a workshop outside with 60 people facilitating a day-long training. And the bottom right is myself with Uncle Bob Randall, who I'll speak about later, who was an Indigenous elder and the custodian of Uluru. And at the top left, I'm in Indonesia. We've got Polly Higgins, the late ecocide champion, was involved with organizing and helping my expedition. And at the bottom right, I was giving a workshop to some Muslims in Indonesia in English and Bahasa. So top left-hand corner is in Bahasa Indonesian, 2 languages, training young people up to become, and old people to become change makers. And along the way, through the Pachamama Alliance, I had said to the global leadership team of the Pachamama Alliance, we have 4 years to make a difference. We must get action around the world now so that by the 2012 UN Earth Summit, we can have real change for treating the Earth as home rather than trashing the place. Bill Kennedy, of Vida Kennedy, made this film for free for the Pachamama Alliance. I think partly because I was insistent we had to have action, and he made this, and I decided to give this film in every community along the way. And so I was giving this in every town and community in 2010, 2011. I gave it in 100 communities over that period and touched over 1,000 people and obviously their families. And my colleague and I did 20,000 kilometers through Australia and Indonesia and trained up change makers. In 1992, I was an intern in Greenpeace in Brussels and also worked in the European Commission, and I helped to form the agenda for the 1992 Earth Summit. But the 2012 Earth Summit I found was now being driven by corporations. And so I realized there's no point hurrying to New York because the 2012 UN Earth Summit has been taken over by corporations. And corporations were and still are very much part of the problem. And unless they adhered to paying the cost of their pollution, what's the point of engaging with them? Certainly, what's the point of having them as part of the environmental solution? Taking a break from my Bike the Earth expedition, Uncle Bob Randall, you saw a photograph of him earlier, invited me to come to Uluru in Central Australia. So I left the bike in Townsville and flew to Uluru. And one of his colleagues broke an arm, so I said, oh, I'll help you. And I ended up spending 3 weeks with Uncle Bob Randall. And I was standing on his land on a rock. The sky was actually like the top picture, but I didn't take a photograph at the time. And as I sat on the rock in the absolute peace of the Australian outback, I saw this one plane pass along the sky. Nothing remarkable. It left a bit of a trail. Nothing remarkable. And then 20 minutes or half an hour later, I saw another plane come back a bit further up now, leaving another trail. Nothing remarkable. But over the course of 4 hours, I saw a lattice grid being built in the sky, and then the entire blue sky became white. And that's when I woke up to atmospheric modification actually is a reality. I used to tell people, go and get a life, stop talking about this stuff, You've clearly got not enough to do. And here was I, just taking a break, and I realized that what I had learned in the European Parliament in 1995 to 1998 was true. So in the European Parliament, there was a report done, and I've got a copy here. In 1998, report from the Environment and Security Committee on the HARP project, essentially on an American weapons scheme which has the potential to change climate. I've got the document here which I've downloaded from the net, and you're very welcome to see it later. Here is an 8-minute clip about HARP. And this HARP, this High Aurora Atmospheric Research Project, is part of the US Star Wars program. In late 2011, I was here and living in Dunedin, and I had a quite chat at the university with Jim Hansen of 350degrees.org. And I mentioned HARP to him. I was still a bit naive, and I thought, well, he's a reasonable man. He'll know privately, one-on-one, at the end of the lecture. But his body language and lack of interest at the end of the lecture was, for me, very revealing. And that's when I realized he was part of, and I felt part of something far bigger and more sinister. And I began to doubt that 350.org was quite so honorable. And I began to believe, which I do today, that it has been manufactured along with Gore's Climate Reality Core and other community groups around the world to push the climate change agenda. And there are others more recently I wondered about. So just to allay any fears that you may have, I fully support One Planet Living and all that relates to One Planet Living. And I fully support the rigorous enforcement of the polluter pays principle. But I'm not a climate scientist, and I cannot discuss the nuances of science, but I can read the research, and I have read the research. And when I read the research of the IPCC and the drifts, I can read it and understand it and begin to believe it. And then I can look at the alternative science, and I can get into it and slowly immerse myself, and then I can begin to believe it. I find it very difficult to have an independent perspective either side of the science. And here's the, from a couple of days ago, who wouldn't be frightened by this when they saw this? except that if you know the bigger picture, as I'm alluding to now, perhaps it's not quite so frightening, but what is challenging is what are the motives, what are the aims of the people behind, and how do we, as upright, spiritually connected individuals, who can we be in order to stop and to reduce that kind of the actions out there. So we move to the next stage, which is kind of where are we? And so right now, it's always useful to remind ourselves, what does weather mean? Weather is the definition of weather is atmospheric conditions at any one time, and a climate means average weather, and averages always change. At the moment, I've identified 5 kind of key aspects for where we are. First of all, there is massive disruption to local weather worldwide. There is unusual freak weather events in India, to Australia, so droughts in Australia, fires in in California, massive droughts, unseasonal cold or unseasonal heat, earthquakes and volcanoes, lots of localized freak weather all over the world. And you can find it on the internet. I was looking into India, Bangladesh, Brazil. Every country is complaining about it. And particularly in the French or German or Russian, you see more evidence of these things happening, but no one is taking a big overall picture. Secondly, there are lots of these opaquely funded community non-governmental organizations. I believe Extinction Rebellion is actually has been funded with ulterior motives to help bring about the breakdown of society, rather like some of these others. There was the Prague Spring, the North African Spring, you may remember a few years ago, and everyone's saying, wonderful, people are uprising, freedom. I was working in Eastern Europe and I knew the Caucasus and Russia so well. I had my ear to the ground because I've been working with civic society. I thought there's something wrong there. People are not rising up, but there have been people from Soros and the National Democracy Endowment Foundation in the US had come in to work in these countries and basically were paid to infiltrate and to teach people how to break apart society. So Otpor in Serbia, Georgia, Egypt, Russia, Venezuela. I'm not sure where this other one on the right is, perhaps somewhere in Tunisia or something, but and I sense Extinction Rebellion might be doing the same thing, designed to break apart societal structures for something else to come in. So I've said, first of all, this massive disruption to local weather. Secondly, there are these opaquely funded community NGOs. Thirdly, there is very little independent research on what's happening to climate. But there are lots and lots of people now talking about worldwide about alternatives to the climate mainstream and noticing that something's not quite right. And then we've recently seen a massive public relations machine behind a young 16-year-old girl. And that PR machine, I understand, has interests in cars and moving to the next green paradigm. And the name of that organization, which is a public relations outfit, is We Don't Have Time. Very cleverly done. It's not politically correct to ask questions about where the money comes from, but we have to do it. But I've been criticized by just asking, where does the money come from, who's behind it, who benefits. There is the ongoing lack of democratic accountability at the United Nations. I mentioned about the corruptedness in the IPCC at the beginning, how this good scientist was removed and the energy person was brought in, and now there's an economist. So there's always someone who's kind of reporting to another government. It's not transparent. As I was thinking today about how would I sort of bring together the 4 aspects of climate, I came up with what I call 4 streams. There's the main stream, the side stream, the jet stream, and the midstream. I'm sure I can develop this further. And again, I may have made some, I apologize if I massively made some mistake here. I may have done, and but in the last 20 years, I haven't come across anyone else who can challenge me on what I'm saying with any degree of depth. Anyway, the mainstream. So the mainstream is the label for the current climate narrative taken to heart by the corporate greens, the Young Turks, and the newly converted. It's using the language of too late, it's 3 years, 5 years. Well, this was 5,000 days. This is the book I bought in 1990. It freaked me out. And I used this in 1990 as an environmental campaigner. We have to change now, 13 years. And so by 2003, the world wasn't ending. So when I hear the same language now, I think, okay, been here before. But the mainstream is using this language. It's too late, catastrophes round the corner, fear, victimhood, mass distraction. There's not time to do any research. We have to be in action now. It's my way or the highway. It's frightening language. And then the side stream. The side stream includes Monckton, Lawson and Plymouth. Plymouth is the Australian geologist stroke climate scientist. Very good to read, highly erudite, but quite a lot of people in New Zealand, also in Dunedin and in the Seniors Climate Action Network, dismiss him because he's paid for by the minerals industry. When I threw it back at them to say, well, who pays for Greta? No one could answer that, and it wasn't important. And I'm not saying that that Plymouth is completely right. He's a bit out of date, and he doesn't mention HARP. And I'm not a scientist. I can't evaluate him, but he does ask some bold questions in an honest way. And then there's the midstream, which is all the things which are critical for climate, in terms, and I've got a list of them in no particular order. Deforestation reduces cloud formation and rainfall. If you change a meadow to a monoculture, you're going to change the temperature, or the microtemperature from the meadow to the monoculture. If you're throwing chemicals on the land and in the air, or you have lots of EMF smog, you're going to kill the insects and the birds, and that will have an effect on the fertility of the land. If you tarmac or over floodplains, or build, like in some parts of Australia, massive urban developments without any concern for the nature, you're going to raise the temperature. If you're straightening rivers, and then of course the sun, which is so important. You can see the size of Earth. In the mainstream climate models, the sun is not factored in so much, and then water vapor, which is 80% of the atmosphere, is not factored in, nor are clouds and nor are volcanoes. There's some massive gaps. And my fourth stream is the jet stream, which is the HARP, stratospheric direct energy weapons, where I want to spend a bit more time. Let's listen to it and see if you can understand what I think you're saying.
Essentially, we're drawing oceanic rain systems that exist over the oceans into geographic targets, into our agricultural areas. The technology uses electromagnetics, so we're not interfering with the atmosphere or with the environment. We're not damaging it. We're not using chemicals fired through rockets like other technologies use. We use a very gentle but powerful technology, launching electromagnetics into the atmosphere to modify the flow of the weather system over the ocean and drawing it into a target. So
they park out in the oceans and they use the ocean water, as you heard him testify, using the ocean's water to create the water vapors, and then use the barium and the aluminum particles to steer the weather and create the rain if they want, or the drought if they want. This is all part of the Bill Gates from hell funding to spray us like bugs, to control the weather and manipulate at will for their agenda. Can you remain silent while all this is happening? The Silver Lining Project and how it operates off the West Coast back in 2017.
3 to 5 inches, guys, in such a short period of time, there is going to be more flooding and more...
As always, the simple and logical question is, how can this be? How can so much rain fall in such a short amount of time? Longtime Weather War 101 viewers already know the answer to that question, and it isn't an atmospheric river stretching from Hawaii.
Stretching all the way from Hawaii into the West Coast. We've got this Pineapple Express. We are watching this round of powerful new storms making their way into California with even more heavy rains and high winds.
Why are meteorologists okay with repeatedly saying this water vapor is streaming from the island of Hawaii, with no natural explanation for why that would be? Why would the island of Hawaii be providing this water vapor instead of the whole of the Pacific Ocean? Here's one very tangible reason for why that would be. A massive geothermal power plant with huge banks of fans capable of blowing tremendous amounts of water vapor into the air. This plant is conveniently located precisely at the beginning of the so-called atmospheric river. The Hawaiian Puna geothermal plant is exactly like the Californian geothermal plants like Casa Diablo that fuel the water vapor mass when it reaches the coast. Why can't meteorologists see with their own eyes that the so-called atmospheric river abruptly originates from the island of Hawaii but is fueled by other, equally inexplicable sudden streams of water vapor? Why can't meteorologists see that when this artificially created water vapor stream reaches the coast of California, bursts of water vapor erupt from all over the state to complete the storm system and create the otherwise inexplicable deluge California is currently experiencing? For years, Weather War 101 has explained why geoengineers have such difficulty getting it to rain in California. This system depends on sequential water vapor generation from one state to the next, adding to storm systems until saturation point is reached. California, being at the beginning of this nationwide cycle, has no states before it to bring storm systems to saturation. Since there are far fewer water vapor generators in the Pacific than there are on land, sufficient water vapor to tip saturation point rarely reaches California. However, recent evident increases of the number of water vapor generators in the Pacific have produced enough water vapor concentration on several instances for the on-land water vapor generators to push them past saturation. This is the verifiable sequence of events that produces these rare rainstorms in California, and it is the verifiable sequence of the current storm as well. Here we see streams of water vapor burst from nowhere as if from a fire hose. In fact, in the perpetual effort to numb the public to reality, fire hose is quite often exactly how they refer to it. Here we see more streams. Here we see even more streams. These streams are intended to combine and bring near saturation water vapor mass to California, where it can be tipped to force rain. These streams are clearly not the result of slow evaporation from the sun. Clearly, this rapid water vapor generation comes from fixed sources in the Pacific Ocean. The most definitive way to show deliberate intent is to show the on-land water vapor generation streams that are intended to push the incoming water vapor past saturation point. Observing this proves the coordination and deliberate intent to make it rain, and once you understand the process, you can witness it with any storm on the planet. Once again, in 2017, this is the only way storm systems happen, and it's the reason that when it does rain, it comes down in deluge. While the social media bot networks misdirect and shift focus to Governor Jerry Brown failing to upgrade the emergency spillway, the real question people need to be asking is, where did all of this water suddenly come from after 4 years of severe drought? No rational person would blame the governor for not upgrading an emergency spillway during extreme drought unless they were aware of the capacity to create sudden, overwhelming events like this.
Another one, a week before the fires in California took place.
Lasers sound like the stuff of science fiction, right? Sound completely unbelievable. How could our military possibly be using those in future warfare? Guess what? We've just had a recent breakthrough, more great test results that are making lasers a reality. So it's called Athena. Lockheed Martin makes it, and they've been doing a lot of the pioneering in this laser field. Now, what's really exciting about it is that it's so hard to harness that much power and make it compact enough that it's actually going to make practical sense downrange. And they've proven that they can do that. Recently, they tested it against 5 moving drones, so realistic drones that they might go up against with, enemy forces might send against us, for example, or terrorists might send against us. And it successfully shot down all 5 of the drones. This is huge news because it means that in a realistic, practical setting, it's looking very promising. So it could be ready to field quite soon. So when you see the movies or you look at comic books or television shows, when you see laser weapons, they tend to be a color, right? Red or green or something like that. Real lasers, one of the key advantages that they provide is that they are invisible. You actually can't see them. You just see this damage suddenly starting to blow something up. So if we take a look now at what the Athena did to a truck. So we're looking at a truck engine, and the Athena within seconds was able to beam right in there, heat the whole thing up, and burn through the engine of this vehicle. So if you can imagine if you were in that vehicle, all of a sudden, this hole would start appearing in your engine, and the whole thing would just disappear. That's what these lasers do. Now, there's some other key advantages that we should mention. Let me give you 3 of them. 1, unlimited ammo. As long as we have power, we have an unlimited magazine. And downrange, of course, having unlimited ammo can be a huge advantage. 2nd, it's silent. You don't give the enemy any advance warning that it's coming. And then the 3rd one I wanted to touch on is that it travels at the speed of light. So not only are we delivering powerful, decisive effects, lethality, we're also doing it so rapidly they don't know what hit them. So if you could circle back to that example of being in the car again, that would happen so instantaneously, within seconds, you truly would have no idea what was happening. It would just suddenly start disintegrating, right? So what can we use these against? So we talked about the vehicle a bit. We talked about how Athena has just proven itself against drones. But in the real world application, our forces could use it against the drones. We could use it against aircraft. We could use it against vehicles on the ground, like we mentioned. We could also use it against fast attack boats. And in fact, Athena's sibling, Adam, a couple years ago proved that it could eliminate these fast attack boats. So if you imagine boats start trying to swarm one of our ships, not a problem for this laser. Burns right through the hull. As you can see right there, it's burning right through the hull. I'm incredibly excited about this news, this great news about the successful testing of Athena, because it means that we'll be putting these powerful weapons soon. We could put them in the hands of our warfighters and give them even more powerful weaponry to keep themselves safe and also to deliver the effects that we need. They can be used, laser weapons can be used offensively and of course defensively too, to help protect our homeland. Think of our airports that might be under threat from enemy drones. They could be used to protect we could use them statically and used to protect our airports. They could be used to protect our power grid, our nuclear plants. So there's lots of different exciting applications for this technology. It is no longer science fiction, but science fact.
And I heard from a number of people interviewed who's lost their houses that the fire started in the smart meter. Instantaneously, the fire started all over. Wherever there was a smart meter, the fire started. And one person had a smart meter encased in a huge Faraday cage, and it caught fire inside that cage, but it was so strong, the whole house was fine, but you open up this cage and it was a wreck. So that's why one of my conclusions will be to get rid of your smart meter or move back to an analog. If you're finding some of these facts hard to understand or take in, I accept. When I first heard these in 2010, 2011, I was, get a life, you know. I was actually quite cross with the person who introduced me to these things. But over the years, I've begun to realize perhaps there is more to it, and perhaps there is some truth in these. But if people are struggling to take these ideas in, I would just say, which bubble are you in? Are you in a New Zealand Labour bubble or a national bubble? Are you in an Auckland bubble or a Christchurch bubble? Are you in a kind of a new greenie bubble? What kind of bubble are you in? And if you are aware of that kind of language and the jargon, if you can stop and get out of it and just learn some other perspectives, you might see another way of looking at the world. My third section is, how do we get here? How could the Western world get to this state of affairs by allowing this to happen? And in a sense, why did we not learn from Eisenhower and his call to be educated and to be informed? To understand this best, the late Catholic priest and cosmologist Thomas Berry described in his book, The Dream of the Earth, the explanation that the entire industrial age has been a period of technological entrancement and an altered state of consciousness, a mental fixation that allowed us to ruin our air and water and soil, and to severely damage all of our basic life support systems. This dream of progress, as he called it, suggests that we arrive at some unspecific mythic paradise, and we do so by relying upon the earth as a big machine to produce the resources that we need so that we can all individually get what we want and get to that mythic paradise. And technology will control all the nasty bits of the earth as well as our own bodies, and we will become masters. But if we are masters of the earth, we can't be part of the earth and its wider interconnectivity. We will have lost the sacred communion with the earth and ourselves. The indigenous people of the world, they refer to this as the white man's trance. They say that the modern world lives in a kind of dream. And the Kogi of the Sierra Nevada in Colombia talk about us as the junior brother. And you may know that some of them, when they're born, they spend the first 18 years of their life in the dark before coming out. And so that when they come out of the womb, when they're given birth, they got to keep that connection with spirit for 18 years, so that when they come to the light, they still have that spiritual connection. But we are born and boom, we're outside, and we lose that spiritual connection, and we never quite get back to that deep connection. To wake up from this kind of dream, if you like, requires us to acknowledge the assumptions underpinning our worldview. And I usually spend 1 to 2 hours on this in a workshop, and I could come back one day and lead a couple of hours to do it with you, more interactive. But as we do this together in a workshop, we then begin to see that we all have these assumptions about life, that they will look after us, or you have to fight your way to get what you want, and someone is better than someone else. There are assumptions which we make up, and we live as if they're true. But central to all these assumptions in our modern world is the idea that we are separate from each other and from nature. And on the other hand, the indigenous peoples of the world, and now quantum physics, are saying we're all profoundly connected, we're all one, we're part of a greater whole. And so if quantum physics is agreeing with the indigenous wisdom of the world that we're all part of a greater whole, we can let the philosophy, the paradigm of the modern world aside, pause, leave that, and look at the opportunity of a way of looking at the world that is, if you like, draws on quantum physics, Te Ao Māori, the interconnectedness of everything. And that, I think, is the new way of looking at the world, the new lens. And with this story of interconnection, and with daily mindful connection with our heart and soul, our higher spirit and etheric body, then we have a huge opportunity to be part of a living earth. And just imagine what that entails, with gratitude for the trees, the forests, the rivers, and the communication we can have with animals and with trees and with rocks. Of course, in Australia, everything has life. 400 years ago, 400, 500 years ago, after the colonization of Latin America with Columbus, it was said in the Americas that the modern world would eventually come back together with the indigenous world, and that a new way of creating the world and organizing the world would happen, if you like, to marry the creative intellect of the mind and the mind with the wisdom of the human heart and spirit. The eagle represents the world of the mind, the industrial, headstrong, individual me culture, whereas the condor represents the earth-honouring, cooperative peoples of the world and is in touch with the wisdom of the human heart and the spirit. And I call this talk The Last Dare of the Eagle, because I'm sensing that this climate emergency we're in, this environmental challenge to force people into big cities, is the last dare of the eagle to try to hoodwink us away from the possibility of coming together as one to live in partnership. And as people wake up, the people of the eagle will see that we want to be heart connected with each other and with nature, and that the eagle and the condor will then fly together again. As Gandhi said, he wants us to be the change, not to do the change. And there's an opportunity for us to look at human being rather than being human doings. As part of the move over to a world, if you like, which honours the eagle and the condor, we would have to forgive all those eagles, whoever they may be. And of course, that's a part of that, forgiving ourselves for who we've been being. And here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have a phenomenal opportunity to bring together the heritage of Te Ao Māori together with the modern world, and bringing these two cultures together. We are perhaps one of the unique countries in the world which could offer a true way of honouring the planet, drawing on the indigenous wisdom of Te Ao Māori with the Anglo culture of the modern world, and create a country that is living in harmony with itself and with each other. So moving to the final section today, how do we get out of this mess? And I have 5 suggestions. The first one is to stay away from superficial mass movements and silently go to work on your self-knowledge, as most of you here do already. If you want to awaken all humanity, first awaken yourself. If you want to eliminate the suffering of the world, first eliminate everything that is dark and negative in yourself. In fact, the greatest gift you can give the world is that of your own transformation. To go out, you have to go in. Develop your inner condor to fly alongside the eagle. The second recommendation is to become alert and knowledgeable, and to learn from former President Eisenhower's suggestions. There's a great book by Will Wilkinson, Now or Never, which is I often invite people to use as a template. A quantum map for visionary activists. Fourthly, decentralize your energy, resource needs and food sources rather than centralize renewable energy through the 5G smart meter, smart inverter link up. This can be a challenge, so it's best to do with friends and with others. Plant carrots, learn about permaculture, to re-fertilize the soil, and feel the joy and the delight of harvesting and eating fresh organic food. I'm sure most of you do this anyway, but as I was thinking today, how do I inspire people to start the process of awakening? And just plant a few carrots, plant some cresses, start now. At a bigger level, and I will develop this further in the future, but at a bigger level, I would like to see a Citizens' Earth Council to oversee the United Nations with perhaps 17 people with full clearance to all military levels. And I would want to move the climate change and any other environmental secretariats all into the same body, because at the moment there's the United Nations Environment Programme in Nairobi, and there are the climate change and other secretariats around. They're kept apart for good reason, so they can be manipulated, and I'd like to see them all centralized. 2022 is the 50th anniversary of the United Nations Environment Programme, so it would be a good time for New Zealand to take a lead and demand that there be one repository for the world, and maybe a New Zealander can head it up. And then finally, learn and study about the other energy sources and some of the teachings from the ancient mystery schools and sacred geometry. Again, some of you may do this. I'm sure Ruth's an expert in that already, but there's some tips. So I think I'm hoping that in this in this talk and this presentation, I'm hoping I've given you a sense that I don't believe climate change is the issue that it's been talked up about. It's a hype to encourage us to act now quickly to get to definable central city status. And I don't believe that at all now. I've got more and more sense that there is this atmospheric modification happening. We need to become aware of it, all of us, to do our own research, to ask questions, to hold our systems to account, and demand answers from authority, and at the same time look at how we're being in terms of our ecological footprint and how we work with our communities to make the world a better place. So that's all from me. Thank you.